Our lives are laid out on a road of bumps, turns, struggles, and more. How do we respond? How do we endure adversity for learning and growth? I'm Aubrey Johnson, and we'll explore these questions and more on the road to rediscovery. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Road to Rediscovery. I'm your host, Aubrey Johnson. The Road to Rediscovery is about reflecting on the life lessons that life throws at us, right? To reflect and grow, and then, of course, uplift others, pay it forward, and help others who are struggling through dark times. Now, as you know, on the Road to Rediscovery, we are very passionate about delivering quality content that is of value to you and your personal growth. If you like what you hear, please visit roadtorediscovery.com/donate. That's road, the number 2, rediscovery.com/donate. We'll give you a shout out in a future episode. And as always, there is no obligation. We are truly, truly grateful for your listenership. My special guest is an accomplished writer, motivational speaker, philanthropist, and more. Her journey is one of racial segregation, violence, struggle, but with strong faith and inspiration. Born the youngest of 5 children in South Africa, in the midst of apartheid, she moved to New Zealand at age 22, then later to Australia. In her reflection, she's found inner strength and discovered her true purpose. We often hear examples of how the COVID pandemic has brought out the best in people, right? Well, in just 10 days during lockdown, she wrote her first book, Don't Just Fly, Soar, a book chronicling her amazing journey through pain, discovery, and immense inspiration. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Kelly Markey to the show. Hello, Kelly. Welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here.
Hi, Aubrey. It's great to be here and your wonderful listeners. I'm looking forward to unpacking this journey with you.
Oh, thank you so much. Likewise, we are very, very looking forward to this great conversation. So, Kelly, if we can first kind of frame the picture, so to speak, for the listeners, can we start by giving the listeners a glimpse of your life growing up in South Africa?
Yes, sure. So I guess we all know South Africa is the guru for apartheid. I was born sixth generation born in South Africa. My forefathers hailed from India, North India. I grew up in a segregated community. So I lived in a community that was predominantly demographic Indian, South African. That's where I went to school. That's where I lived in the local community, did my shopping, everything was just my demographic. So I wasn't really exposed to any other demographic in the everyday life unless it was outside the norm.
I see. I see. So, your first encounter, I guess, of injustice or knowing that something just quite wasn't right, was it something that you've seen on television growing up, or was it around the perimeter or outskirts of your community, or was it certain things that happened to friends and people you know? How
Yes.
did you encounter that struggle of violence?
Yes, sure. So I think quite early in my life, I discerned that something was not quite right
Hmm.
at primary school level
Hmm.
because South Africa had lots of sanctions imposed on the country in terms of, export and sports and all of that. But as a primary school child, you don't really equate what's going on. And slowly the color came to me that, hey, why is this happening in our country and what's not,
Hmm.
right? So as I grew, I learned to unravel and understand that. And in my book, I write about my experience growing up.
Hmm. Hmm.
Again, very young, and we went to a beach. I come from a huge family, my mom and dad and their siblings. It
Hmm.
makes for a small army with my cousins, and we decided to have day at the beach. And we drove about 200 k's from home to go to what's known as a renowned tourist spot, only
Mm.
to get there and there were boards advertised, no Indians and dogs allowed.
Oh my.
And yeah, we were slayed because,
Yeah.
as kids, we traveled so far. We had our picnic baskets and were looking forward to, just being at the beach and in the water.
Yeah.
And then we looked at the local parks and we saw the same boards. So I've actually included some of that in my book, which was the first time um, when I grasped how different our world is compared to the rest of the world because I hadn't traveled at that point.
Right.
The only external exposure I had was the television, and then I knew something was grossly wrong.
Mm.
And and then I started to, pay more attention from there.
I see. I see. And like the example you gave of going to the beach, with your cousins and other relatives, and I mean, their children as well, right? And um, I mean, that's like having like dreams and excitement just shattered, to arrive there and then see that because of the color of your skin, you're not allowed. And not all children understand that at that time. It sounds like you did, and you started to, you had a sense for that, but that had to be just heartbreaking for the other children there, especially those younger than you, I'd imagine.
Absolutely, because my
Yeah.
younger cousin was with me and she couldn't grasp exactly what was going on. And
Hmm.
I've recorded this in my book. And she said to me, "What's going on? Did they buy the beach?" And I was like, "No, no one's bought the beach."
Hmm. Hmm.
I couldn't really explain it to her, but
Hmm.
I guess eventually the message got through because it's heartbreaking to
Hmm.
be part of that. But I guess when you grow up in a country thinking that's normal,
Hmm.
it gets normalized, but it's not really normalized because
No.
then I grew up and I worked in my first corporate job in South Africa as well, and I discovered the segregation in that facet as well. And then I moved to New Zealand and Australia, and I had to, unravel the stereotypes and the mindset that I've come from. And it was a different world. And then it had its own challenge as well. So I unpack some of that in my book as well, in terms of, growing up in a certain way and having, I guess, stigma attached to you. And then you go into another country where people say, this is a cosmopolitan melting pot and we
Right.
treat everyone
Right.
uh, right. And I had to come, I worked as a corporate professional, come around the board table and to be seen as an equal. But I had this uh, inhibition because I knew I wasn't equal. And
Hmm.
I knew how I was always suppressed and treated. So, it took some work, and then I discovered the real story that no, I'm not really, uh, what can I say, equal, because even though they say in the developed world that it's a fair shake, it's not really a fair shake. You do get judged.
Yeah, and I'm of the belief that that happens pretty much everywhere you go, right? And but I can't even begin to imagine, Kelly, the adjustment or the shift that you had to go through in the mindset and stigma that you had growing up all those years in South Africa and then in New Zealand. Sure, there was a melting pot, and sure, there was, I guess, no segregation or little or no segregation in New Zealand, right? I mean, you were able to go to restaurants in different places,
Yes.
but there is a preconceived notions, right? And I guess judgments that people make of others based on the color of their skin, especially if they're not, I guess, culturally from that area. Um, Yeah.
Exactly. If I may, Aubrey, take it a
Hmm.
little bit deeper, I
Hmm.
think humanity has a mindset and they get conditioned a certain way based on their values, their upbringing, what
Yeah.
their grandparents or parents have instilled in them.
Hmm.
And you see
Hmm.
that carried forward. And nobody really stops to ponder if this is right. One of my other experience was working in New Zealand, and I worked in a pharmacy, so obviously dispensing medication, and I did that to the entire community, the local community. And
Yeah.
one day we had so the community pharmacy is essentially two parts. It's the over the counter
Hmm.
section and then the dispensary section. So we have different staff that
Right.
normally work in different areas, and this was peak hour and it was lunchtime. So the assistant that worked in the shop area took the prescription and handed it to me to dispense. And I had this prescription dispensed and ready. Everyone else was on lunch break, and this woman walks in to come and collect her medication.
Hmm.
So I knew who she was because I'd seen her before and I dispensed her medication. So I proceeded to go towards the shop counter to exchange um, money and give her the prescription, but also counsel her on how to take the medication.
Right.
And she just flung the medication at me. I also talk about this in my book.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
some of it was glass bottles, it was just shattered. And
Oh my
I was
goodness.
like, I was broken in shock. Like this was the last thing I expected. And her
Right.
response was, I do not want to be served by a black person.
Oh my.
And she yelled that at me, and I was like the only person there, and everyone was at the back. People came running, and
Yeah.
they were in shock. And my manager, could see me shaking, and he's like, just go to the back, take your lunch break, relax, and
Yeah.
I'll handle this. And everyone
Mm.
came to the back, and they were like hugging me, and they were like, "Are you okay?"
Oh wow.
And for the first time in my life, growing up in South Africa in an apartheid regime, I had to experience that in the corporate world because
Right.
um, in South Africa, as I said, we lived in segregated communities, so it's
Hmm.
your own community, and you don't really have people of that mindset. And here, when I thought I was in a developed free world, I had that, and I didn't see it coming, so I had no way of handling it. But I soon discerned that you can't shut discrimination out in international borders. It lives everywhere. We have to
Everywhere.
transform minds.
Yeah, we definitely need to transform minds, and in addition to transforming minds, it's what I like to call um, stop the cycle or stop the pattern, right? Um, Generation after generation after generation, of racism and bigotry and hatred, um, from 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and if it's passed on from parent to child to child to child to child from generation after generation, it's perpetual. I mean, it'll never go away, it'll never end, and we have to stop that crazy cycle, right? And find ways to, just say nope, it ends right here. The hate ends right here. It's just like, if there's a cycle or of generations who, you know uh, none of the children have went to the university, someone has an opportunity to stop that cycle and be the first one to attend university. And that's one example, I guess, of stopping the cycle and breaking the pattern, right, in a good way. And I think hopefully over time that leads to transformation, but everyone has to play a part. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely. We have to work in concert with each other,
Hmm.
and I highlight so many personal experience in my book.
Yes.
Also, I give voice to things that I have experienced, but also other people,
Hmm.
and where humanity could go. I guess this is my book, and I'd like to, if we can, I'd read a little bit because it just goes with the theme we're discussing at the moment. You know,
Yes.
everyone that has read this normally contact me with taglines, and they're like, wow, this line has spoken to me. I've literally had over 2,000 taglines sent my way. And by
Amazing.
far, this is one of my favorites. Our behavior is styled, that is a style that continues to change as we perpetually add creativity in modest and sometimes prominent portions. If
Hmm.
you analyze your behavior, you can easily become aware of your creativity. For instance, when I cook a curry, I conjure it up with ease without real deliberation. However, sometimes I may run out of a key ingredient like coconut cream, and I think on my feet and add normal fresh cream and lime juice instead. This innovative fusion
Hmm.
is minor nonetheless. The new creation is sensational, and I have often gained revered compliments. This illustration demonstrates that I can behave creatively and rack up positive accolade. Then so can the rest of the universe. And we can do this with issues that are more dramatic than culinary delights. Creativity sparks in so many profound ways. We wear hair, apparel, smiles that are defined by exclusive market brands. Yet our heart and character are the most vital branding tools. The dawn of a new humanity depends on your awakening to create a better and renewed universe. You must be the change you wish to see in the world.
100%. That is very, very profound, and I love the part where you mentioned about the outward labeling of brands. While we seek a lot of value in that, there's the truest value of brand is what's in our
Yeah,
hearts, what's what the way we treat other people. That's the true brand. And
absolutely.
yeah, I mean, that's absolutely tremendous. And there's a few things about your book I wanted to ask you as we have this conversation, Kelly. One thing was I just needed to know, throughout growing up, you know, in segregation, violence, pain, and those sorts of things, uh, and the event where the lady at the pharmacy threw the medicine back at you, right? I mean, you went to university and studied just like everyone else, regardless of color or culture or background or ethnicity. And to have this happen to you, what has helped you rise above and stay above self-doubt and inadequacy that people may tend to have about themselves because they're being oppressed in a certain way?
Absolutely. Look, when I have moved from South Africa and being overseas, it felt like a vortex, no doubt.
Mhm.
Some days I could not find fine, even with the binoculars.
Mhm.
So it's a trudge,
Yes.
and I had to find my own mojo. As you know, some days I was bleeding so profusely that I felt I wouldn't see the sunshine for the next day. And I
Mhm.
guess in the middle of this vortex, God found me. And that's what has sustained me. Is even while I was in the valley, I had to
Mhm.
get up and say, God spoke to me and said, I have better things. Even unraveling this book, I've gone through not just living through racial discrimination. I
Right.
was held at gunpoint in South Africa. I've gone through infertility, endometriosis, miscarriage, divorce,
Oh my goodness.
the whole gamut. And
Yeah.
retrenchment, living in a foreign country. I've
Mhm.
come out on the other side because each time God sustained me. And I look back, I had no desire to write a book because who wants to be an open book literally to humanity?
Right.
Uh, but during lockdown, God compelled me because people were reaching out to me. I didn't have a book at that point. And for some reason, because of the mayhem of the pandemic, people were just from around the globe. I'm well traveled and I have networks all over the globe. Were reaching out to, I guess, tap into resilience, motivation, or inspiration because people had no idea what happened when the apple cart toppled, and they just wanted to know how they could, bounce back. And then I decided, wow, I've got all this lived experience and people need to glean from it. And God spoke to me and said, everything that you've gone through is for a reason and it's to help people. So I thought, okay, let me just grab my laptop and start sharing my lessons gleaned. And that's how the book was born. It was, what I lived. And so I could put it to paper, and it's it's really relatable, and people from all over the world read it and they're like, wow, I can't put this down. People are reading it for the third and fourth time. So it's about being practical. And for me, when I was going through a hard time, I found that sometimes I would get, you know, um, the well meaning person that's trying to help me, but it was just a band aid when I was bleeding. So
Right.
what I tried to do is actually be real in terms of the pain when you're going through infertility or a
Hmm.
miscarriage. It's real, and
Mm,
I tried to speak from my core so I could relate to people who are in the same journey.
I got you. I see. And there's one operative word or maybe two operative words that you just mentioned that I'd love for us to hone in on a little more, Kelly, and that's be real, right? When it comes to hardships such as a miscarriage, to be real, um, it's tremendously difficult to do, I would imagine, because of just the devastation of the event itself, right? Sure, time heals all wounds, but this is a true devastation for something like this to happen, or divorce, or bankruptcy. I mean, it's these are all devastations. So, um, something you mentioned when it comes to an important activity or exercise that one must do in your book is to uncover their truth, uncover your truth, right? And so when you talk about someone uncovering their truth, I'm thinking that could involve taking a hard look in the mirror in terms of choices we made, mistakes that we've made, and even the things that we did right, to help us learn what our truth is. Is being real part of discovering what our truth is, as you stated in the book?
Absolutely, I think you are on the right track. Definitely on the road to rediscovery, apt name. So my book has 25 self-help tools, and
Okay.
we see so much of this marketed, and I guess the distinction is the fact that I've lived it, and I've
Yes.
tried to bring it to people where you actually peel off the layers and hone in on what you need to. So living your truth is not perpetually doing the same thing and expecting to get a different answer.
Right.
It's actually looking at it rationally and
Hmm.
analyzing. So some of my tools would walk you through this. Like,
Hmm.
what have I done? We're looking at the whole landscape in terms of the ecosystem. Like, for example, if you were having an issue, who's your network? Are you talking to your wife, to someone at university, to your church, to hospital, depending on, the caliber of the issue?
Hmm.
Look at that, hone in on the time you spend with each of these core people in your network. And we equate, if you're talking to a professional clinician, how much their time is worth in terms of time and monetary value. And then if you don't get the lesson, just for hypothetically speaking, we're trying to manage you from drinking and driving, and you spend 20 hours talking to your network, and then next week you're doing it again.
Hmm.
So we hone in on the people, the time, the energy, the money, and next week if you do the same thing, how much of that so people can see a clear pattern. And when you really start to get real with yourself, when you actually look at the pattern and you realize there's a pattern and how I'm going to address this pattern.
Hmm. Hmm. And so, like you said, being real, discovering your truth, you see this pattern, and then you can start to rationalize how to address the pattern. And I think at some point down the line, that should um, your purpose should be revealed to you. I would imagine, and so just so the listeners can understand what the true meaning of purpose is. Okay, I know it's quite easy for someone to confuse someone's job as, that's my purpose, or say a role that they have. They're the caregiver, or they are the homemaker, or they are the provider, as their purpose. Um, can you share for the listeners or explain um, what is it? What makes purpose different from a job or a role?
Yeah, absolutely, sure. So, everyday tasks, that's, I guess, we're just trying to hone in on life and get
Hmm.
things done and move from A to B, which is where I was at, focused on my corporate job, just uh, getting an income, paying my mortgage,
Right,
traveling, whatever.
right, right.
My purpose, I tapped into what I really want. I guess I got real when the pandemic hit and we didn't know whether we're all going to be part of the stats. And I was like, wow, I could die the next day or, in the next week.
Yeah.
What do you want to I want to be remembered for? So what
Hmm.
legacy you want to leave behind? And I was
Right.
like, I know I've lived through a lot. I've got these lessons learned, but ultimately what I want to do is see global transformation, and I want to see people change in a positive way and not bashing them to say, hey, this is the right way, walk in this path, getting them to a place where they realize how they need to think critically. So part of my journey in the book is writing that, and I discovered my purpose, and my passion
Mm.
was to do that. So finding
Mhm.
purpose is finding what makes sense for you, discovering what your talents are, and you would do that with ease. You get up in the morning and you feel invigorated because it's what you want to do. It's not weighing down on your shoulder. It's
Right.
you want to see the change.
Understood. Understood. And I guess to kind of dovetail on being real and finding your truth and learning what your purpose is, um, there's a lot of, it sounds like self awareness has played a major role in your life's journey. And Kelly, I'd like to ask you, I think you mentioned in part of your book, discovering your blind spots. What is discovering the blind spots, and what are those blind spots, and how can we discover them? Now, I don't want to disclose or give up everything in the book, obviously,
Yeah.
but these are profound anecdotes. I think that that appeal to listeners that this book contains.
Absolutely. I think taking people on a journey is a great thing because sometimes they don't realize that they are carved out and molded in a certain way
Right.
and been that way since, Adam.
Hmm.
So that was one part of the journey. And yeah, discovering your blind spot, absolutely. I saw, merit in that for me because we get conditioned in our own ways,
Yes.
in our own culture, in what we are exposed to.
Hmm.
And the whole arena is so big, the ecosystem is so big. And for me, I've worked in 5 different countries. I've traveled to over 200 cities around the world, and I know if I hadn't done that, my mindset would have still been the same as the one I had when I was living in South Africa. What
Hmm.
has opened the space is the array of experiences and,
Hmm.
having different people. Um, and and quite often I was brought, you know, brought up in a way with certain values, and I thought, you know, just put my blinkers on and just move. That's the way. And people would say to me, hey, what's wrong? um, and I could think of numerous examples where people challenged me. One of it was, I was brought up to never have a drink, like alcohol, and
Right.
every Friday when I was working in the corporate, everyone would get up and have a drink on Friday night, and it's like, what's wrong with you?
Right.
And then we were like, the same. I don't have caffeine, and we'd be on projects, and they're like, how can you get through this project without caffeine?
Right, and
And
stay awake, right?
exactly. And those are the simple truths, but there were other things. And then in my book, I invite readers to actually get real and invite someone from their network to have a cup of coffee or a
Right,
drink or whatever,
right.
and sit down and get real with each other and be, I guess, open to people taking
Mhm.
off the layers, but being honest with you. And if I say something to you, I'm saying it because I love you and I want to see you enhance. I'm not saying it to be critical. So it's up to the individual whether they actually want to grow and whether they see merit in what's, you know, being laid on the table.
Understood.
So
I
for
see.
myself, I found myself here, being away from my nucleus in a foreign land. I attended every, group in church and social activity because I wanted to be the best version of myself.
Mhm.
And I would attend all of this. And yeah, when people gave me feedback, when they did, I would reflect on it, and I'd be like, how can I enhance myself? How can I grow? And I was like, oh, I didn't realize that. Maybe, yeah, it's my blind spot, or it gave me vision to get better. So I would
Mm,
encourage anyone to do that, open up your world to explore and let other people in to speak to you. And, a classic example is like, I go to a book club, which is older women, much older than me, and they had a pattern of thinking a certain way. And after they read my book, they were like, wow, we didn't realize that, racism and discrimination stood out, that much, because that's
right.
how we were raised. They said to me, that's how we
Mhm,
were raised. That's what our parents told us. This is
mhm.
how you should, think. And I was like, wow. I didn't continue the conversation because, I just thought, wow, just by writing this book, it made me uh, provide the tool to people to reflect on their blind spot.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, it sounds to me as if self-awareness has played a major, major role in your journey. Not just in the reflections in writing the book, but also what you've done in your journey while living the life, right? You have s- uh, done self-awareness types of
Yes,
things, about where you are, how you're responding, what are some of the ways that you can improve, and what are some areas that are those blind spots. I think that takes a lot of self-awareness to try to figure out what those blind spots are in one's life.
yeah. So I guess being in this club with women that are 70, 80, and 90, and for the
Mm,
first time they are getting the revelation of their blind spot
yes.
is mission accomplished.
Oh, for sure. Without a
Yeah,
doubt. I mean, it's transforming lives, and it's making people think, and there may be some behavior change from people reading your book as well. Reading what you've lived through and gone through, and in without actually saying it word for word, just the act of reading your book calls them to action to reflect on their own path, it sounds like.
absolutely. that's that's the whole idea of it, absolutely. And
Mhm.
I think that's why it's resonating with so many people, because they realize that they've been locked in a pattern, and they need to transform the way they think.
Yes, they certainly do. And I was looking at pieces of your book, and I was looking at some taglines that people have shared, that has resonated with them. A lot of input and a lot of great feedback from the readers of this book to you, with just profound, life altering anecdotes and just insights that you're sharing in your book so beautifully, and there's one part that stood out to me, if you don't mind me sharing or reading.
Absolutely. I live for this moment, Aubrey. Go for it.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, great. So thank you, first of all, Kelly, for allowing me to read this to you. After I read it to you, I would love if you can share or break down um, the rationale or the thinking at that time in your life as you were living what you wrote. Okay, so here it is.
Absolutely.
So in your book, as you talk about as a child, right? Your teacher telling the class about the gruesome murder of two boys who you later learned were your first cousins. Then taking that frightful walk home from school, as students were still expected to do, even after such a gruesome murder. And you became poignantly aware that you can only depend on, quote, you, yourself, and I. And then you say later on, you mention that your intrepid voyage with the progression of vast time has enabled you to glean that you don't have to be solely dependent on me, myself, and I. Can you walk us through that discovery that you've had over that path?
Wow. I I feel like I want to cry. Yeah,
Oh.
it has touched. Yeah, I think every part of this book, that's what it is, Aubrey. It's
Hmm.
from my heart, and
Hmm.
when I wrote it, emotions came to the surface as well. And even right now, like when you read that, I feel like I want to cry because it was
Hmm.
real.
Yes.
And and I did. I remember, like, the part of that chapter is talking about how my cousins were all in the schoolyard earlier, and then the next break I didn't notice them, and I was wondering what happened and where did they all go. Something was peculiar.
Hmm.
And then, something was amiss when our teacher was late, and then he broke the news that these two boys were, gruesomely murdered.
Yeah.
And I was in shock. And then I, at that young age, realized that we're all born alone,
Mm.
and our journey, our road, no matter how hard it is, like my parents couldn't have been there for me at that time, or anyone else.
Mm.
Even our school, abandoned us, and I had to find the courage within myself because I
Hmm.
was petrified. I don't want to give your listeners the gruesome details of how my cousins were
Right. Right.
murdered, but we were shocked as kids, and I literally was petrified to be outside,
Of
and we were
course. Of course.
we were petrified for decades.
Hmm.
And this first walk after getting the news, I realized that life is always going to be this journey. No matter
Mm.
how petrified you are, you have to keep going. And I had to keep taking one step after the next till I
Hmm.
reached home. And
Hmm.
I didn't know if someone was going to catch me and
Hmm.
murder me that day.
Oh my.
And eventually, slowly, the numbness, dissipates.
Hmm.
And then I realized, yeah, I don't have to just rely on me, myself, and I, because
Mm.
God found me.
Yes.
And
100. Oh yeah.
God, yeah.
Hmm.
helped me through the journey, because I had to build an internal vector that it was just me, myself, and I.
Right.
And no matter which human you depend on, they would let you down at some point. And that's just the man. They are limited, right?
Yes.
So they can make mistakes. They can, not be in two places at once. They could let you down at the crucial hour. There's so many explanations for it. And then God took me on this journey to realize no matter what I'm going through, no matter how difficult it is, and I walked through some of my experiences,
Yes.
even when I went through miscarriage and how broken and alone I felt, and I felt like it is me, myself, and I.
Hmm.
And I saw God's hand in that.
Hmm. Hmm.
With everything else, he
Yeah.
showed me he was a thread in that fabric.
That is beautiful. That is absolutely beautiful. And what a discovery to find after all the years, right? God was walking with you during those frightful commutes and walks back and forth to school after finding that gruesome news out, and then of course, like you said, through many years and traveling and living in different places, you've come to that realization and discovery of not always having to rely on you, yourself, and I. God has been with you all along. Um, Kelly, I think throughout our conversation, I think we made it clear for the listeners, okay, in a nutshell, um, what your primary message is for these listeners, right? The primary message is in the book to, you know, everyone do their part to transform and make change, be the change that you want to see. And we can't just visualize the change, we have to be the change. And it involves everyone doing their part, to love one another, to forgive one another, to treat your fellow man equal regardless of race, ethnicity, color, economic level, education. To me, that sounds very, very clear in what you've shared in the message of your book. What I'd like to know, knowing, and asking you personally with your journey, okay, Kelly Markey, can you explain to us in a sentence what is your road to rediscovery?
Well, if it's one sentence, my road to rediscovery was looking within and finding God.
Mm, yes, beautiful. Because everything else just falls into place after that, right?
Exactly. Even as you described the journey when I was a little girl and I had to trudge that path that was so
Hmm.
difficult. I
Hmm.
look back and I see God took me through that because He knew what was in my future, living
Yes.
abroad, and the things that was going to come hurling my way. And because I made that extremely difficult journey as a child, everything else, no matter how difficult it was, it felt like it was child's play.
Yeah, I see. I see. That reminds me of a phrase that I've heard once, and it really reminds me of this. And I try to live this to heart. Okay, the phrase is, let's see, calm seas a skilled sailor makes not. Okay.
Yeah, that's profound.
Yeah, it is
Absolutely.
profound, isn't it?
Yeah,
And so to me, that tells me that, um, if God is walking alongside of me as I'm taking these frightful walks to and from school and so forth, and God has a purpose, a mission for me, right? He's never said that it's going to be easy. He's never said the road's going to be smooth, you know, but He will be with you every step of the way, and that's where the faith comes in, right? That,
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So to me, and I speak in metaphors a lot. I apologize, but calm waters does not make for a skilled sailor, because you have to learn how to navigate through the turbulent times, right?
Absolutely. And you have to build your strength, and you're not going to get your strength in the smooth sailing.
No, no, that's
Yeah.
exactly right. Exactly right. So, Kelly, how can the listeners connect with you, follow you, and pick up a copy of your book?
Yes, sure. So I am on social media, and you can
Hmm.
find me on Kelly Markey, both on Insta, LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm on Goodreads as well, Kelly
Good.
Markey, author. I've
Hmm.
got some amazing reviews there. I have a website. If you want to purchase the book, you can purchase a signed book. I also have a journal called Glean, Grow, and Glow, and they're both available on my website, which is www.kellymarkey.com.
Wonderful, wonderful. We're going to have links to your social mediums and your website, and even Goodreads on the episode show notes, so the listeners can click those links as they're listening to this wonderful, m- just mind altering, life altering conversation. And purchase a copy of that book. This is a call to action for all the listeners, right? To purchase a
Absolutely.
copy of the book. Don't just fly, soar, and find out the essence of that title and what it means in Kelly Markey's book. There's all sorts of anecdotes. She shared some on this show, all based on her own journey. Okay. And it's going to be a tremendous read, and all sorts of life changing lessons to be pulled from that, as you have given us so graciously with the women in your book club. At their age, they even found things that they could transform their lives over.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a gem
Yeah.
in it for everyone, every walk of life.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Kelly, thank you so much for coming on the show. I truly, truly appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate your transparency. I appreciate your vulnerability and opening yourself up, all in the spirit of helping others grow, and all in the spirit of changing the world. Thank you once again, Kelly.
Thank you, Aubrey. It's been a delight. Thank you for having me on your show. I
Oh,
really appreciate it.
well, thank you. My pleasure. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening. And look, if you have a loved one, a colleague, a coworker, a relative, neighbor who just seems to be not themselves, falling into bad behaviors, bad habits, not quite sure where to turn or who to turn to, going through dark days of despair, I humbly ask that you please share this show with them. Because on the road to rediscovery, we want our listeners to know two things. Number one, you're not alone. And two, there is always hope. I'm truly grateful to have you on the road with me. Thanks again for listening. We'll chat again soon. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of The Road to Rediscovery. We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email at roadtorediscoverypodcast@gmail.com and leave us any questions or comments you may have. The Road to Rediscovery is an AJ Shark production.